Hello and welcome to Expulsion at 50, an oral history project using podcasts. The expulsion order issued by President Idi Amin in August 1972 changed the lives of 80,000 Asians, people who called Uganda their home. My name is Dola Vasani. This experience on our mothers was particularly traumatic and painful. Episode 41 is a tribute to Gangaben Vasani, my mother who died on the 12th of August 2020, aged 98, and to all mothers who experienced the expulsion from Uganda. They are the unsung heroines, and we salute them. Life in Uganda. Through the arranged marriage system, women arrived in Uganda as new brides, some as young as 16 years old. Some travelled from within East Africa, while others were fresh from the Indian subcontinent. As Jafar Kapasi said, in 1948, my father returned to India to get married. My mother, who was from Bombay, had to adjust to a new lifestyle, learn the language, and help my father in the business. Away from their immediate family members and networks, the women quickly established themselves within the extended families of their husbands and in their communities through their temples, mosques, and churches. How your life turned out was a lottery. You were lucky if your husband and his family were kind. Men generally married quickly if their wives died, and some did in childbirth. Young women found themselves becoming stepmothers. It wasn't uncommon to have families with 5 or more children. Like elsewhere in the world, women put up with men's vices such as alcohol and tobacco. Domestic violence happened, but was never spoken about. Leaving the home or divorce were never an option for women. Despite this, many women lived well and raised successful families in Uganda. Most of our mothers were established homemakers, taking care of children and the household. They learned how to speak Swahili, and some were fluent in other languages. Ashifa Dillon's family lived in Masaka, where they were strongly established within the community. We lived in a big house, and my mother was like a queen, both in money and in living standards. My own mother, Gangaben, was born in Kenya, was independent and drove a car. In her 40s, she learned how to swim. She was also very active in the Maila Mandal, the Women's Institute, always organizing different social and cultural events. Rubabem Manji also spoke about a stress-free lifestyle. Our life in Uganda was very comfortable. We had staff to help, which reduced the tension. There was a strong sense of community. It was a peaceful life, filled with many activities and cultural outings. Within family-run businesses such as shops, women managed the office administration and looked after customers. Some women were enterprising. For example, Jaswant Jatli's mother was a woman of the soil. A small-scale farmer, she employed over 20 people and grew cotton, coffee, and sugar. Pragnahe's mother was an accomplished seamstress who sewed blouses, bras, and petticoats for saris in their small family shop in Jinja. Some women were professionals, most notably in the education and health sectors. Tina Athaya's mother trained as a nurse in the UK and worked in the Grade A hospital in Entebbe. Mummy was the midwife who delivered Idi Amin's child before Amin became president, she says. Later, all these experiences would serve our mothers well. The Expulsion. In August 1972, our settled lives crumbled. Rohit Sangvi recalls the reaction to the president's announcement. Everybody was aghast. They could hardly process the shock of what had happened. It was a very anxious and tense time, especially for our parents, who had invested everything in the country. There were many decisions to make in a very short space of time. Your passport or papers shaped your destiny. Many with Ugandan passports found their citizenships revoked. Holding a British passport had different meanings and determined what rights you had. In one family, people could hold different passports, compounding the stress. Najma Daudbai's mother was born in India and held a British passport. She was the only family member allowed to go to the UK or to India. In the end, we decided to go to Pakistan, she said. They accepted the whole family because we were Muslim. Similarly, Jaswant Jatli recalls, my eldest brother had to stay behind because of his papers. This caused my mum extra stress as no one knew what would happen to him. Families made decisions based on what they considered was least risky. Urmila Patel's father was a teacher and remained in Uganda, while his wife and 4 children left for India. We didn't know what happened to him. After 2 years, we received a telegram to say he was in Belgium. It was a similar situation for Rohit Vyas. His father, an essential worker, continued at the Mehta Sugar Estate in Lugazi. We went to England and stayed with relatives in a crowded house. It was a very unsettling time for my mother. One day we got a letter saying he was in Austria. The pain of separation is exemplified in Ashifa Dhillon's story. Her father went to Pakistan while she, her siblings, and her mother ended up in different corners of the world because of their papers. My mother lost her memory on the plane. She never saw her children again in one place. Not at weddings, not at funerals. The expulsion broke her. Once the decision was made to leave, it became a race against time. The more assets one had, the more complicated and emotional was the closure. Those with retail outlets, workshops, factories, offices, and farms couldn't sell their vehicles, equipment, and stock. Property was confiscated and bank accounts were frozen. No one could take more than £50 cash and one suitcase with personal belongings. Sumanben Sangvi explained, we had 5 vehicles and 5 drivers. Each got one. We felt this would help them to start their own enterprises. I recall spending days wrapping our possessions in newspaper and packing them into wooden tea chests, which were then sent to Mombasa by rail. What would finally arrive at the destination was anyone's guess. Some just locked up their houses and left. In Indian households, gold is a hallmark of wealth and security. Some women developed creative ways of getting their precious gold jewelry out of the country. My mother sewed all her gold jewelry into the base of a macrame bag she had made. It was nerve-wracking but successful. Others were less fortunate. Sumanben Sangvi recalls an incident at the airport when the army official instructed a woman to tip out a large spiced jar she was carrying. Amongst the turmeric in the jar was gold. The soldier was so incensed, he shot her husband in front of her. Getting out in one piece became our highest priority. Early experiences in new lands. The refugees started leaving Uganda from early September 1972. They left a country where the sun shone every day. Exchanging it for grey skies, short days, cold, and drizzle was a shock. Women wore their saris and slippers as they didn't possess warm clothes. Ashok Talati recalls, from November the days got shorter, and by December we were really miserable, not seeing the sun for days. In the UK, people arrived at Stansted Airport and were hustled into a bus and driven to camps around the country. Volunteers were there with tea and offered coats and other clothing. Camp life was bittersweet. We slept in single-sex dormitories and went to the canteen for our meals. Some children even started attending the local schools. Above all, it was a safe space. For those who ended up in rented accommodation, the experience was generally more harrowing. Fatima recalls the poor state of housing in Birmingham. There was no bathroom. In one bed, it was me, my sister, my brother, and my auntie. We slept together to stay warm. Zain Lalani's family became stateless and were flown out of Uganda by the United Nations after the 90-day deadline had passed. 5 transit camps had been established in Europe. We didn't know where we were going. I asked the flight attendant, and she told us Malta, a small island south of Italy. In April 1973, their paperwork was completed and his family ended up in Toronto, Canada. From the transit camps, different governments pledged to take on certain numbers of refugees. The Dutch government, for example, took in 300 families. They were hosted in a summer camp and were given housing in different locations. Vanita Benvyas remembers the help they received from social services. We were given a house and taken to buy a cooker and fridge. They were very good to us. Some families went to India, which for many was unfamiliar and not very welcoming, as shared by Urmila Patel. Our possessions were stolen on the trains. It was a strange country to us. The weather was hot, hot, hot. For many mothers, the early experiences of England was of poverty in money and lifestyle. Going from the camps to council housing was sometimes a rude awakening. My mother recalls the council house being filthy and unkempt, and it stank of meat. She couldn't believe that some English people lived in such a mess. Public or social housing, be it in England, Canada, or Belgium, had its share of racism and violence. The external environment was often hostile. Fatima recalls the racist graffiti on the windows. Northfields was the roughest suburb in Birmingham, England. My mother became isolated, got high blood pressure, and became depressed, she said. Getting Indian spices and vegetables was also challenging, especially in the early days. If they could visit the UK, the new immigrants filled up their cars with shopping. For others, it involved special shopping trips, as Sanjay Patel explains. Our relatives from London would bring the spices when they came to visit us in Somerset. Establishing new lives. In the early days, survival was the main aim, securing a roof over our heads and money to put food on the table. For many women, this meant finding paid employment, at home or outside. In New York, Rehana Manji's mum started babysitting, while many others put their sewing skills to use. Pragna Hay remembers that my mum learned how to drive and got a job in a sofa factory. This newly found independence was empowering. Others got jobs in factories where they couldn't wear a sari. Wardrobes changed. From then on, many started wearing a salwar kameez or trousers. Access to finance was important for those who wanted to start their own business. Fatima Patwa recalls, "We were able to buy a house and a business with the money my father had outside Uganda." And Bina Briggs reminisces, "Because of the support system, we didn't need to go to the refugee camps. We arrived in Luton and I got a job at the airport." Similarly, Suman Ben Sangvi had some capital and stayed in Southall, an Indian-dominated area. We were mentally prepared, and having money in the UK also helped with the adjustment and settling in process. We bought a post office where we both worked. Some women attended language classes. As Eunice Shah recalls, "My mother, a frontier woman, reinvented herself. She worked during the day and attended English classes in the evening. We helped her with her homework." Younger mums adapted more quickly and many blossomed, developing new careers and making new friendships. The ability and opportunity to work were important. Shizan Muhammadi explains that within 2 days of arriving in Ottawa, my mother, who was only 17 years old, got a job in the bank. For my own mother and other older women, the transition was naturally more difficult. The social contact with other women from Uganda was an important anchor and facilitated the transition. Sejal Sachdev remembers that her mother regularly met other women from Uganda. They shared their struggles and got support from each other. Many women felt isolated and got depressed. Some became quite ill, while others' lives were shortened. The isolation was compounded in predominantly white areas where it was more difficult to connect with people who understood them. The big mental shift came once they acknowledged and accepted there was no going back to Uganda. Children grew up and went to colleges and universities. Many got good jobs, bought houses, and established their families, careers, and roots in these countries. Sejal Majithya remembers her mother as a selfless person who was always caring for others. This continued to the very end. Upon her death, she donated all her organs, giving a new lease of life to others. Living standards rose, and Uganda became a distant memory. Some went back to visit, and a few returned to revive business interests. 28 years later, in 2000, I took my mother back to Kampala. It was an emotional experience for her. She could put Uganda in a place where it was no longer painful. It helped her to close the circle and accept and cherish that life, one that was filled with precious memories. She was also able to say that her life was in England, and that was okay too. Om Shanti. Thank you for listening to this podcast. You can find all the episodes on the usual platforms through anchor.fm/expulsion50 and on YouTube. Till next time, keep well and keep safe.